Beneath the golden sun, Ahmose's bare feet knew the path even before the faintest blush touched the horizon. The sand, still holding the cool of the night, offered a brief respite before the sun's inevitable assault. He moved with a quiet purpose, his thin linen kilt doing little to ward off the chill that lingered in the pre-dawn air. His destination, the kitchens, a sprawling complex on the western edge of the palace grounds. In the distance, the palace rose, a monument of pale stone against the darkening indigo sky. Even in the dim light, its scale was breathtaking. Towering obelisks, massive pylons carved with scenes of triumphant pharaohs, and the golden tips of flagpoles glinting as they caught the faintest stirrings of the wind. A symbol of power, of divinity, a stark contrast to the mud brick hovels where Ahmose and the other servants lived, huddled together for warmth and a semblance of community. He reached the kitchens as the first cook began to stir. The air was thick with the smell of stale ashes and the promise of the day's brewing. Ahmose's task was simple, brutal in its repetition, hauling water from the Nile. It was a task performed by dozens, a constant stream of men and women moving between the river and the palace, filling cisterns and troughs that fed the vast kitchens and the elaborate bathing chambers of the royal family. The sun crested the horizon, a molten coin searing the sky. Almost instantly, the cool of the morning vanished, replaced by a heavy, oppressive heat that promised to intensify throughout the day. Ahmose wrapped a damp cloth around his head, a meager defense against the relentless glare. The Nile, usually a source of life, offered little comfort. The water was murky, thick with silt, and the constant traffic of boats and barges churned up a foul odor. Ahmose dipped his buckets, the leather straps biting into his shoulders as he hoisted them. The weight was considerable, and the journey back to the palace was a slow, arduous trudge. He passed others on the path, women with baskets of laundry balanced on their heads, their faces etched with exhaustion, men carrying heavy stone for the never-ending construction projects, children scavenging for scraps of food near the refuse heaps. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a shared understanding of their common fate. The palace loomed closer, its beauty now a mocking reminder of the gulf that separated them. The rhythmic slap of his sandals against the stone path was a metronome marking the passage of time, each step a testament to his endurance. He reached the cisterns and emptied his buckets, the water splashing with a dull thud. The overseer, a burly man with a cruel face and a whip coiled around his wrist, watched him with a cold indifference. There was no praise for diligence, only punishment for idleness. Ahmose paused for a moment, straightening his back and wiping the sweat from his brow. He glanced towards the palace, towards the shimmering gold that adorned its highest points. He imagined the pharaoh, cool and serene, receiving tribute and dispensing justice. A world away from the relentless toil that defined Ahmose's existence. Later, as the sun reached its zenith, Ahmose found a brief respite in the shade of a date palm. He shared a meager portion of bread with a young boy, barely more than a toddler, whose mother had died from fever a few weeks prior. The boy's eyes, wide and trusting, were a painful reminder of the vulnerability of their lives. A ripple of commotion spread through the courtyard. Guards, resplendent in their polished armor, were clearing a path. A procession was approaching. Ahmose and the other servants quickly moved aside, bowing their heads in deference. It was the high priest, carried on a litter by 4 muscular slaves. He was a figure of immense power, his face hidden beneath an elaborate headdress. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a suffocating aroma that seemed to cling to the skin. As the procession passed, Ahmose risked a glance. He saw the high priest's eyes, cold and calculating, scanning the crowd. A shiver ran down Ahmose's spine. He knew that even the slightest infraction, a misplaced glance or a mumbled word, could bring swift and brutal punishment. The day wore on, each hour a repetition of the last. The heat became unbearable, the dust choking. Ahmose's muscles ached, his skin burned, his spirit weary. Yet he continued to haul water, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to endure. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, a murmur of discontent rippled through the servants. Rumors were circulating, whispers of increased taxes, of dwindling rations, of a pharaoh growing increasingly paranoid and demanding. Ahmose ignored the rumors. He had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous commodity. It was better to focus on the task at hand, to keep his head down, to avoid drawing attention. Finally, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, the overseer signaled the end of the day's labor. Ahmose joined the throng of weary servants, shuffling back towards their hovels. He looked back at the palace, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It was a magnificent sight, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. But tonight, Ahmose saw something else: the endless toil, the silent suffering, the countless lives sacrificed to build and maintain this symbol of power. He saw the truth that lay hidden beneath the golden sun. Echoes on stone. The rhythmic splash of water against clay echoed strangely in the seemingly endless corridor. Ahmose shuffled onward, his bare feet slapping against the cold, polished stone. Each step was a tiny rebellion against the palace's relentless grandeur. The vastness pressed in on him, a silent testament to his own insignificance. He was a ripple in a pond of granite and gold, quickly swallowed by the still, uncaring surface. He navigated the labyrinthine paths, a world away from the sun-baked fields he remembered as a child. Here, torchlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that elongated the already imposing hieroglyphs carved into the walls. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense, masking the less pleasant odors of sweat and unwashed bodies that clung to the servants' quarters. Turning a corner, he nearly collided with a figure hurrying in the opposite direction. "Ahmose, watch where you're going," a woman's voice chided, though the tone was more playful than angry. He recognized her instantly. Tia. She was a breath of fresh air in the stifling palace. She possessed a quiet strength, a resilience that seemed to bloom even in this barren landscape. Her eyes, the color of the Nile in the early morning, always held a spark of warmth. "Forgive me, Tia," he mumbled, shifting the weight of the water jugs. Tia smiled, a flash of white teeth in the dim light. "Heavens, you look exhausted. Another run to the gardens." He nodded, the leather straps biting into his shoulders. The high priest desires fresh lilies for his chambers. Tia's smile faded slightly. "Of course he does." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Come with me. I know a shortcut, and maybe I can find you something to drink. That water looks heavy enough to crush a lesser man." Ahmose hesitated. Shortcuts were risky. Getting caught outside designated routes meant punishment. But the lure of a moment's respite and the prospect of Tia's company outweighed the fear. He followed her, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of overseers. Tia moved with a confidence he envied, her sandals making barely a sound on the stone. She led him through a series of smaller passageways, the walls adorned with faded murals depicting scenes of royal hunts and religious ceremonies. The air grew cooler, the scent of incense fainter, replaced by the earthy smell of damp stone. "The palace is a world unto itself, isn't it?" Tia said softly, her voice echoing in the narrow passage. "A world built on the backs of people like us." Ahmose grunted in agreement, but remained silent. He had learned the hard way that voicing such thoughts was dangerous. Tia stopped before a narrow wooden door, almost hidden in the wall. "This leads to the lower kitchens. They always have something brewing." She pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with the clatter of pots and pans and the aroma of roasting meat. The scene was a stark contrast to the sterile grandeur of the palace corridors. Here, the air was thick with smoke and the floor was stained with grease. Servants hurried about their tasks, their faces etched with exhaustion and resignation. Ahmose saw, with sudden clarity, the palace's true hierarchy. The priests and nobles resided in the sun-drenched upper levels, basking in luxury and power. Below them were the scribes and administrators, meticulously managing the kingdom's affairs. And at the very bottom, toiling in the shadows, were the servants, the nameless, faceless masses who kept the entire machine running. He was one of them, a cog in a vast, uncaring mechanism. Tia nudged him gently. "Don't look so glum. Even cogs need oiling." She winked and approached a woman stirring a large pot over a crackling fire. Ahmose watched, his heart lighter for the brief reprieve. Tia possessed a rare gift, the ability to find moments of kindness and connection in a world designed to crush both. He wondered how she did it, how she managed to maintain her spirit in this suffocating environment. He took a deep breath, the smell of roasting meat filling his lungs. Perhaps, he thought, survival wasn't just about suppressing hope. Perhaps it was also about finding those small, flickering flames of humanity and holding on to them with all your might. The kitchen fires. The kitchen fires, voracious pythons of heat, coiled around the bellies of colossal ovens. Ahmose navigated the shimmering air, his footsteps resounding dully on the flagstones. Water skins, heavy on his shoulders, tugged him toward the unforgiving ground. A cacophony assaulted his ears, the snap and hiss of combustion, the steady thrum of grinding stones, Beck's gruff pronouncements. This was the palace's gullet, a place where aspiration withered under a haze of flour and exertion. A crucible of constant labor, driven by a pharaoh's insatiable appetite and a court mirroring his gluttony. With a sigh, Ahmose lowered his burden, the water within responding with a gentle surge. He saw Iset, a gaunt woman whose eyes reflected the Nile's enduring hardships, methodically filling a massive trough. Bread making, today, thousands of loaves destined for the royal table, each a monument to the ceaseless toil that underpinned the luxurious life above. Heat, a palpable force, constricted his chest, stealing the very air from his lungs. The aroma, an overpowering blend of wood smoke, distant roasting fowl, and the sharp zest of rising dough, clung to everything, an invisible shroud that even followed him into fleeting moments of reprieve. He joined the line of bakers, directed by Beck's curt command. The task itself held a brutal simplicity. Scoop, shape, toss onto the peel, and thrust into the oven's gaping maw. Repeat. A ceaseless cycle until muscle screamed, his spine protested, and sanity frayed at the edges. Around him, others labored in mute weariness. A boy, scarcely past childhood, strained beneath the weight of a flour sack. An elder, his face a map of endured sunrises and sunsets, moved with deliberate economy, his actions polished by decades of repetition. No one spoke. Words were a luxury they could ill afford, a squandering of vital strength. Sweat stung Ahmose's eyes. He blinked, attempting to focus, but the heat and the unyielding rhythm blurred the world into a hazy impression. He was a component, an anonymous drudge in a machine of colossal proportions. He glanced toward the furnace mouth, radiating infernal luminescence. He pictured himself falling, plunging into the conflagration, becoming just another nameless element in the pharaoh's endless repast. The fantasy was both terrifying and strangely alluring, a swift conclusion to the torment. Beck's voice, sharp as flint, shattered his reverie. "Ahmose, quicker. Do you seek the lash's caress?" The threat galvanized him. Ahmose quickened his pace, forcing aching limbs to comply. Scoop, mold, toss, shove. Each movement was a silent supplication, a whispered plea for strength. He thought of Tia, her smile a brief, verdant oasis in this arid existence. He clung to the memory of her gentle spirit, a shared cup, hushed words of solace. A trifling thing, a fleeting connection, yet enough to sustain him, to remind him that, within this heartless arena, the flame of humanity flickered still. He covertly surveyed the kitchen once more. The scene was a living frieze of suffering, a stark illustration of the chasm separating those who were served from those who served. The pharaoh, indulging in roasted goose and sugared delicacies, would never fathom the toll of his extravagance. He would remain blissfully ignorant of the sweat, tears, and broken spirits hidden beneath the opulent veneer of his domain. But Ahmose understood, and within that awareness lay a curious power. He was a witness, a silent chronicler of the hidden costs of dominion. He might be inconsequential, yet he was not unseen. He was a guardian of embers, nurturing the sparks of resilience in the kitchen's core. And he would continue to burn for as long as his strength allowed. Whispers of discontent. The crash reverberated through the vast kitchens like a rogue thunderclap. A water carrier, scarcely a man, had fumbled his burden of gilded goblets. They met the flagstones with a calamitous chime, the delicate gold fracturing into worthless fragments. A wave of indrawn breath swept the room, momentarily eclipsing the rhythmic pound of mortars and the sizzle emanating from the ovens. Ahmose, flour dusting his forearms, paused to observe the overseer, a man sculpted from granite and muscle, as he lumbered toward the trembling youth. A palpable dread, thick and cloying, filled the air. It was an ever-present specter in the palace kitchens, a brutal reminder that even trivial errors carried grave consequences. Ahmose understood the unspoken creed. Absolute flawlessness was the expectation, and failure invited swift, merciless reprisal. The overseer offered no words, merely a pointed gesture, summoning two guards who materialized like shadows, their expressions blank slates. They seized the boy, hauling him toward the courtyard, the shattered gold glinting like malevolent stars around their feet. Ahmose averted his gaze, the boy's stifled whimper lingering, acrid as burnt offerings. Later, as Ahmose coaxed the dough, a figure stole the light from his workspace. It was Senmut, his lips perpetually twisted in a sneer of disdain. Once a minor scribe within the Pharaoh's archives, a miscalculation, or perhaps a rival's cunning machinations, had relegated him to the bakery. He never let anyone forget his perceived fall from grace. "Lummox," Senmut spat, his gaze tracking the path of the disappeared boy. "He stains us all with disgrace." Ahmose grunted, offering no response. He'd learned that engaging Senmut only stoked the embers of his discontent. "Can't you see, Ahmose?" Senmut pressed, his voice a low, venomous hum. "We're treated as beasts of burden, less than beasts. A pampered hound feasts better than we, gorging on scraps while we cripple ourselves for a pittance of grain." Ahmose kneaded, the rhythmic pressure a subtle act of rebellion. He knew the sting of Senmut's truth, but voicing it courted disaster. "Labor is labor, Senmut," he said, his voice barely cutting through the clamor. "We endure to exist." Senmut scoffed, a harsh, dry sound. "Exist? Is that your ambition, Ahmose? Merely to draw breath, to break your back until your bones crumble and your spirit withers? I, for one, reject such a pathetic fate." He loomed closer, his breath a stale brew of beer and bitterness. "There are avenues, Ahmose, ways to retrieve what is justly ours, to make them atone for their negligence." A cold tremor chased down Ahmose's spine. He understood the undercurrent of Senmut's words, the treacherous whispers of defiance that snaked through the shadows of the palace. He'd encountered them before, dismissing them as the fevered dreams of men at their wits' end. But Senmut's fervor was unsettling. He slid a loaf from the oven, the searing heat a palpable warning. "Such pronouncements are folly, Senmut. They offer only more despair." Senmut straightened, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Perhaps, or perhaps liberation. You are a simpleton, Ahmose, content to drown in your hardship." He discharged a glob of saliva onto the floor, a gesture of profound contempt, before melting back into the throng of laborers. Ahmose followed him with his gaze, a knot tightening low in his belly. His eyes flicked toward the courtyard, where the overseer and guard stood. Now alone, the overseer raised his arm, a slender whip uncoiling in his hand like a striking serpent. Ahmose spun away, unable to witness the coming brutality. The sound, when it arrived, was a sharp, sickening snap that sliced through the air, followed by a strangled cry, fighting for release. The other workers pressed on, their faces masks of indifference, their movements automated. Yet, Ahmose recognized the glint of fear in their eyes, the tacit acknowledgement of their shared precariousness. He knew, with chilling certainty, that Senmut spoke the truth. Their worth was measured in sweat and toil, their lives disposable, their anguish ignored. The question that now pressed upon him was, what price were they prepared to pay, and what steps might they be willing to take? Scent of incense, taste of toil. The air pressed down like a shroud, a world apart from the rarefied atmosphere of the Pharaoh's inner sanctum. Incense, a fragrant concoction of frankincense and myrrh, fought a losing battle against the undercurrent of sweat and stale bread clinging to Ahmose's tunic. His task, to coax a gleam from the alabaster figures lining the path to the royal bedchamber. With each pass of the linen, he offered a silent plea against disaster, the consequence of a single chip being unthinkable. The statues, a pantheon of deities and regal forebears, reflected the light filtering from the high, narrow embrasures. Their cool surfaces offered scant relief from the heat radiating up from the flagstones. Economy of motion, a skill honed by years of servitude, marked Ahmose's work. Yet, Senmut's whispered sedition lingered, a viper's coil of fear and forbidden longing within him. A nervous glance. He imagined the captain of the guard materializing from the shadows at any moment. Nearing the Pharaoh's doorway, the incense intensified, laced with the delicate sweetness of lotus. He pictured the ruler lounging on silken cushions, blissfully unaware of the brutal labor supporting his gilded existence. His task completed, retreat was his intention until he saw her. Nefertari. She sat at a massive loom in a shadowed alcove near the royal chambers, fingers a blur of motion, transforming thread into art. Sunlight caught in the dark cascade of her braided hair. A tapestry was emerging, a vibrant garden of birds and blossoms taking shape. Colors erupted from the pale cloth, almost painfully bright. Ahmose had always watched Nefertari from afar. She possessed a quiet strength, an independent spirit rare among the servants. She spoke her mind freely, regardless of rank. He hesitated, loath to break her intense focus. Ahmose, she stated, without lifting her gaze. Still tending the statues? He swallowed, surprised by her awareness. Yes, Nefertari. The pharaoh wishes them burnished with Ra's own brilliance. He attempted deference, but the words rang hollow. Her dark eyes flickered upwards, sharp and knowing. Ra shines for all. Ahmose, though privilege can cast long shadows. A furrow creased his brow, uncertain of her intent. What do you mean? She sighed, her fingers never ceasing their dance across the loom. The pharaoh luxuriates in ease, while we labor in obscurity. Have you ever considered the origins of those fine linens? Or the food that fills his table? It doesn't simply appear, Ahmose. It is born of backache and hardship. He shifted, discomfort prickling his skin. Senmut's words returned like an echo. It is the way things are, he muttered, more to himself. Nefertari halted her weaving, her expression hardening. Is it truly? Or is it simply a condition we've been taught to accept? Her hand swept over the burgeoning tapestry. This linen will grace the pharaoh's bed. He will slumber soundly, ignorant of the cost of his comfort. He met her gaze, seeing the burning conviction within. A spark flickered to life within him. Not yet rebellion, but a nascent understanding, a fragile hope. And what cost is that, Nefertari? His voice was a barely audible rasp. She held his gaze, a mixture of sadness and defiance swirling in her eyes. Our lives, Ahmose. Our dreams. She resumed weaving, the rhythmic clack of the loom filling the air. Ahmose lingered for a moment, then turned and left, the incense now suffocating, the sweat of labor tasting like ash. He knew, with a certainty that took root deep within him, that he could no longer ignore the truth Nefertari and Senmut had shown him. The world he inhabited was a fabrication erected upon the backs of the forgotten. And he, Ahmose, was forgotten no longer. Shadows of the night. The flickering torches danced across the polished surfaces of the palace, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched and writhed like restless spirits. Ahmose continued his endless task, the chamois cloth moving in rhythmic circles across the cold obsidian face of a statue depicting a long-dead pharaoh. The air, thick with the scent of incense and beeswax, hung heavy and still. It was well past the hour when common folk slept, yet within these walls, the relentless cycle of service continued unabated. Guards, their faces impassive, stood sentinel at every doorway, spears gleaming dully in the torchlight. Further down the hall, Ahmose could hear the muffled sounds of splashing water and hushed voices as other servants prepare the pharaoh's bath, a ritual performed with meticulous care even at this late hour. Each splash, each whispered word, was a testament to the endless demands of their god-king. Ahmose paused, his arm aching, and straightened his back. The palace at night held a different kind of weight, a silent pressure that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. It was the weight of secrets, of unspoken commands, of a knowledge that countless lives were sacrificed to maintain this opulent existence. A shuffling sound broke the silence. Horemheb, his face etched with weariness, approached, his sandals whispering against the stone floor. He was an older servant, his back stooped from years of labor, his eyes holding a depth of knowledge that Ahmose both respected and feared. Still at it, young Ahmose. Horemheb's voice was a low rasp, barely audible above the crackling of the torches. Ahmose nodded, resuming his polishing. The overseer demands perfection, even in the dead of night. Horemheb sighed, the sound a dry rustle. Perfection is a cruel master. It demands more than any man can give. He paused, his gaze sweeping the empty hall. You have a thoughtful look about you these past few days. I see the questions in your eyes. Ahmose's heart quickened. He hadn't realized his unease was so visible. He tried to appear nonchalant. Just tired, Horemheb. The work is demanding. Horemheb chuckled softly, a humorless sound. Demanding is an understatement. This palace drains the life from us all, little by little. But be careful, Ahmose. Thoughts are like embers. They can ignite a fire if not carefully contained. Ahmose stopped polishing again, his gaze meeting Horemheb's. What do you mean? I mean, Horemheb said, his voice dropping even lower, that these walls have ears. The Pharaoh's spies are everywhere, even among us. They reward loyalty, but they crush dissent without mercy. I've seen it happen more times than I care to remember. He gestured towards the statue Ahmose had been polishing. These stones have seen empires rise and fall. They've seen pharaohs crowned and pharaohs overthrown. They remember everything, and they whisper their secrets to those who listen closely. Horemheb leaned closer, his breath warm against Ahmose's ear. Question everything, Ahmose, but choose your words carefully, and choose your company even more carefully. There are whispers of discontent in the lower city, whispers that could bring ruin to us all if they reach the wrong ears. He straightened up, his face once again impassive. Now, get back to work. The overseer will be displeased if he finds you idle. He shuffled away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Ahmose alone with his thoughts. Ahmose stared at the statue, the obsidian surface reflecting the flickering torchlight. He could almost see faces in the shadows, faces of forgotten laborers, of silenced voices, of broken dreams. Horemheb's words echoed in his mind. Choose your words carefully, and choose your company even more carefully. He resumed his polishing, the chamois cloth moving mechanically across the cold stone. But now, his movements were different. There was a newfound awareness in his eyes, a sense of caution mixed with a growing determination. The embers of discontent had been stoked, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that they would not be easily extinguished. The night held its secrets close, but Ahmose was beginning to understand that the greatest secrets were hidden not in the stones of the palace, but in the hearts of its servants. Cramped quarters, distant dreams. The basalt statue, coaxed to a liquid sheen beneath Ahmose's practiced hand, mirrored the artificial sun illuminating the pharaoh's secluded garden. Each curve, every carefully incised hieroglyph, shone a silent decree of power and lavishness Ahmose could only glimpse from afar. Did the God King ever spare a thought for the hands that sculpted this splendor, the rough, work-worn fingers that conjured his world of gilded perfection? The notion lingered as he finally set aside his polishing cloth. Twilight painted the manicured lawns in hues of violet and gray. Dismissed for the evening, he padded silently through the palace's arteries, leaving behind the vibrant frescoes and soaring columns, headed for the anonymity of the servants' wing. The air thickened, the sharp tang of incense yielding to a pungent blend of sweat, grime, and harsh natron cleanser. The contrast stung. While the pharaoh reveled in chambers draped in gold and azure, Ahmose was confined to a cramped cell shared with 5 others. Tonight, the chamber throbbed with the chorus of snores and murmured anxieties from his sleeping companions. Wavering torchlight splashed dancing shadows across the mud-brick surfaces. The space barely accommodated the meager straw pallets that served as beds. He picked his way carefully over sprawled limbs and bundled rags to reach his designated corner. Lowering himself onto the mat, the prickly straw chafed against his skin. The reek of dust and unwashed bodies filled his lungs, a far cry from the fragrant air of the royal gardens. Sleep proved elusive. The day's exertions had knotted his muscles, and the palace's relentless pulse, the distant drone of priestly chants, the muffled cadence of voices, the soft scuff of sandals, seemed embedded in the very walls. He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to drown out the noise and discomfort. His thoughts drifted to his family, leagues away in the delta. His mother, her hands etched with the map of years spent tilling the land. His younger sister, Nefertari, her eyes alight with mischief and glee. He conjured an image of his father, a fisherman, casting his nets into the murky embrace of the Nile. He envisioned a different existence for them, liberated from ceaseless labor and the ever-present threat of the overseer's lash. A life where Nefertari could master the art of reading and writing, where his mother could grant her weary bones respite, where his father could fish without the crushing weight of the pharaoh's taxes. He knew it was a foolish aspiration, a delicate soap bubble destined to burst against the sharp edges of reality. Still, he clung to it, finding solace in its imagined warmth. He dreamt of a small plot of land, rich and teeming, where they could cultivate their own harvest and erect a sturdy dwelling. He dreamt of Nefertari darting through fields of ripening wheat, her laughter echoing on the wind. He dreamt of his parents reposing in the dappled shade of a sycamore, their faces reflecting peace. The fantasy felt real, almost palpable. He could feel the sun's caress upon his face, inhale the earthy aroma of the soil, hear the clear chime of his sister's mirth. Briefly, he was transported to that idyllic realm, a sanctuary where his family was secure, content, and unbound. But the dream was fragile. The clamor of the servants' quarters gradually encroached, dragging him back to the stifling confines of his present life. He opened his eyes, the vision of his family dissolving like a phantom shimmering in the desert heat. The torches guttered, casting elongated, distorted shadows against the walls. The air hung thick with the smells of sweat and dust. He remained in the palace, a nameless servant in the pharaoh's sprawling domain, his aspirations as remote as the celestial bodies twinkling above. Palace games. The rhythmic clang of the metal gates echoed behind Ahmose as he left the palace grounds. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows of the obelisks, making them appear like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. He yearned to linger, to catch one last glimpse of the colossal statue he'd been shaping, but the overseer's whistle brooked no delay. He hurried away from the well-lit splendor of the royal residence, the smooth, cool stone giving way to the dusty, uneven paths of the servants' quarters. Even in the fading light, he could feel the shift in atmosphere, the subtle yet palpable difference between the world of the pharaoh and the world he inhabited. Tonight, though the usual weariness felt heavier, laced with an undercurrent of unease. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken anxieties. He noticed it throughout the day, furtive glances, hushed whispers abruptly silenced as he approached. The stonemasons, usually boisterous and jovial, had been unusually quiet, their faces etched with worry. Even the scent of incense, usually a comforting presence, seemed to cling to the air with a suffocating intensity. He passed the communal well, its stone lip worn smooth by countless hands. A group of women were drawing water, their voices low and urgent. He caught a fragment of their conversation, something about a new decree, higher taxes, harsher punishments. He didn't need to hear the details to understand the general sentiment. Fear, resentment, and a desperate hope for things to get better. As he neared his own meager dwelling, a small mud brick structure shared with his family, he saw Senmut lurking in the shadows. Senmut, a scribe with a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind, was known for his seditious whispers, his quiet criticisms of the pharaoh's extravagance. Ahmose usually avoided him, wary of attracting unwanted attention, but tonight Senmut beckoned him over with a furtive gesture. "Ahmose," he hissed, his eyes darting nervously around. "Have you noticed the tension in the air? It's thicker than the Nile mud after the inundation." Ahmose nodded, reluctant to engage. "I've felt it. Tonight," Senmut continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I overheard something that could change everything." He paused, drawing Ahmose closer. Two high officials, speaking in the royal gardens. They thought they were alone, but I was nearby, tending to the papyrus plants. They spoke of a plot, a challenge to the pharaoh's authority, a power struggle brewing beneath the surface of this gilded cage. Ahmose's heart pounded. Palace intrigues were dangerous games, and servants were often the first to be sacrificed. What would they say exactly? Senmut hesitated, his eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "I can't say too much. Not yet. But let's just say that the pharaoh's grip on the throne may not be as secure as he thinks. There are those who believe he's grown too complacent, too indulgent, and they're willing to risk everything to seize power for themselves." He gripped Ahmose's arm tightly. "This could be our chance, Ahmose. A chance for real change. But we must be careful. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and we'll all be crushed." Ahmose pulled away, his mind reeling. He wanted nothing to do with palace plots, with power struggles and betrayals. He just wanted to carve his statues, provide for his family, and maybe, just maybe, create something that would outlast his own insignificant existence. I don't know, Senmut," he stammered. "This is too dangerous." Senmut's eyes flashed with disappointment. "So you'd rather remain a slave? Ahmose? Content toiling for a tyrant who cares nothing for your suffering?" Before Ahmose could respond, a sudden shout echoed through the courtyard. A guard, his face grim, was approaching, his spear glinting in the torchlight. "Senmut, Ahmose, the overseer wants to see you. Immediately." Senmut's face paled. He shot Ahmose a knowing look. "Looks like the games have begun." Ahmose felt a cold dread grip his heart. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he was now caught in the web of palace intrigue, whether he wanted to be or not. His simple life, his dreams of a better future, suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable, threatened by forces far beyond his control. He followed Senmut towards the overseer, each step heavy with the weight of the unknown. The palace, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, suddenly seemed less like a symbol of majesty and more like a gilded tomb. The river's fury, the Nile, so often a benefactor, had become a vengeful beast. No longer confined to its ancient course, it surged beyond its banks, a turgid python strangling the fields and gnawing at the palace foundations. The air, heavy and stagnant, reeked of alluvial deposits and rotting vegetation. A persistent drone, the river's inexorable creep, warred with the desperate cries of men battling the inevitable. Ahmose stood immersed to his knees in brackish water, the chill penetrating his skin despite the oppressive heat. He, along with the other palace staff, was tasked with the futile labor of clearing flotsam from the lower courtyards, a task made only more difficult as the river's relentless rise continued. The ubiquitous stone dust had transformed into a slick, clinging mire that coated everything, adding to the burden. The overseer, his face permanently etched with disapproval, bellowed commands that echoed through the submerged chambers, brandishing his staff as if he could strike the river into submission. Fear, sharper than the encroaching flood, drove the workers. A stumble, a moment's pause, invited a lash. The palace's customary splendor, a stark contrast to the lives of its servants, was now masked beneath a uniform layer of grime. Intricate reliefs were softened, polished surfaces dulled. Even the once vibrant gardens offered no sanctuary. Their colors leached away beneath the murky depths. Ahmose's back protested as he heaved a sodden section of papyrus fencing. The waterlogged wood felt impossibly heavy. He pictured Tia, not trapped within these walls, but in the village, undoubtedly offering aid to those whose homes now lay beneath the water. The image ignited a small flame of warmth in the pervasive damp. He knew she'd be coordinating rations and distributing dry linen, tending to the ill and wounded with her quiet fortitude, a beacon of strength in desperate times. The scale of the devastation was crushing. Fields vanished, livestock perished, and granaries overflowed. The river, intended to nurture, had become an instrument of ruin, leaving a wake of despair. The Pharaoh, ensconced in his lofty chambers, was said to be invoking the river deities, but down in the muck, the servants felt forsaken, left to contend with the unleashed elements. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting grotesque, elongated shadows across the inundated courtyards, a new decree came down. They were to begin fortifying the lower walls with sandbags, a last-ditch effort to stem the tide. Ahmose joined the line of exhausted figures, shoveling sand into rough sacks, his hands growing raw and blistered. The weight of the sand, the weight of the obligation, the heavy cloak of the Pharaoh's indifference, all pressed upon him. He noticed Senmut, the scribe, struggling to hoist a filled bag. His usual meticulousness had vanished, replaced by a hard resolve. Mud obscured his spectacles, blurring his vision. Ahmose wondered if Senmut was questioning his involvement in their scheme, if the weight of their predicament was finally settling upon him. The Pharaoh was not just a distant figurehead. He was a force, a power capable of unleashing its destructive force in myriad ways. As night descended, torches flickered to life, painting the waterlogged landscape with dancing shadows. The air stung with the sharp odor of burning oil mingled with the ever-present stench of the mud. The work continued, unyielding and grim. Ahmose knew that even when the river finally retreated, the scars would remain. The fields would need to be resurrected, the granaries replenished, the homes rebuilt, and the servants, the kingdom's forgotten foundation, would be the ones to do it, their lives an unending cycle of toil and hardship. The river's rage would resonate long after the waters were gone. Aches and illness. The reek of stagnant water clung to Ahmose, a persistent reminder of the Nile's wrath. He strained, muscles screaming in protest, hauling another waterlogged log towards the makeshift barricade. His back, already a knot of simmering pain, threatened to seize completely. Each lift, each drag, was a testament to the Pharaoh's callous indifference to their suffering. He wasn't alone in his misery. A cough, raw and rattling, echoed nearby. Ahmose glanced over to see a young servant, barely more than a boy, stumble and fall against a pile of soaked reeds. His face was flushed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Other servants rushed to his aid, their faces etched with concern. "He's burning up," one of them murmured, pressing a hand to the boy's forehead. The fever's taken hold. Ahmose knew what came next. A worsening cough, weakness, perhaps the dark blotches of plague. The palace healers, preoccupied with the royal family and favored officials, would likely offer little more than watered-down beer and empty platitudes. The boy would be left to suffer, his fate a grim warning to the rest of them. He pressed on, ignoring the throbbing in his lower back, the ache in his shoulders. He had to. Tia needed him, and so did Senmut. Their plan, fragile as it was, depended on him staying strong, staying focused. He couldn't afford to succumb to the illnesses that preyed on the weary and overworked. Later, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, Ahmose found a quiet corner to rest. The palace, usually a symphony of sounds, was hushed, the only noise the lapping of water against the stone walls. He stretched gingerly, tried to loosen the knots in his back. It was no use. The pain remained a dull, persistent throb. His thoughts drifted to Nefertari. He imagined her nimble fingers flying across the loom, weaving intricate patterns into tapestries for the pharaoh's pleasure. But she was also a healer in her own right. She knew the properties of herbs and plants, and she had a knack for soothing the sick with her gentle touch. He remembered her mischievous grin, her eyes sparkling with glee as she chased butterflies in the palace gardens before she became the dedicated weaver. He closed his eyes, picturing her now, not in the opulent weaving room, but tending to the ailing boy. He could almost see her, her brow furrowed in concentration as she mixed a poultice of herbs, her voice soft and reassuring. Ahmose opened his eyes. He had an idea. He found a scrap of papyrus and a reed pen, and by the flickering light of an oil lamp, he wrote a short message to Nefertari, detailing the boy's symptoms and asking for her help. The next morning, Ahmose delivered the message to Nefertari's weaving room. The air inside was thick with the scent of flax and dye. Nefertari, surrounded by a rainbow of threads, greeted him with a warm smile. Ahmose, what brings you here? He handed her the papyrus. She read it quickly, her expression turning serious. The poor boy, she murmured. The floodwaters carry all manner of disease. Can you help him? Ahmose asked. Nefertari nodded. I have some herbs that might ease his fever. And I've been experimenting with a new weave, a tighter, stronger fabric. It would make excellent bandages. She gestured to a pile of freshly woven cloth, its texture surprisingly soft and pliable. It was a far cry from the rough, scratchy linen usually used for bandages. This is beautiful, Nefertari, Ahmose said, running his hand over the fabric. It will bring comfort as well as aid. Nefertari smiled, a flicker of pride in her eyes. I'll gather what I can. Meet me by the granary after your shift. Ahmose felt a surge of hope. Nefertari's skills, her compassion, were a beacon of light in the darkness of the palace. Even in the face of the pharaoh's indifference, acts of kindness, of human connection, could still bloom. He returned to his work, the ache in his back still present, but somehow lessened. He was still a servant, still bound to the pharaoh's will. But he was also part of something more, something stronger, a community of people who cared for each other, who dared to defy the injustice around them, one small act of kindness at a time. He was no longer alone. The floodwaters may have ravaged the land, but they had also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Floating moments. The scent of roasting meats mingled with the sweet perfume of dates and figs, a rare and welcome change from the usual dust and sweat that clung to Ahmose. Torches blazed in the palace courtyards, casting flickering shadows that danced along with the music. Drummers pounded out a rhythm that vibrated through the very stones beneath his calloused feet, and the high, clear notes of flutes spiraled into the warm night air. It was the festival of the Nile's return, a celebration of the receding floodwaters, and even the servants, usually confined to the shadowy corners of the palace, were allowed a fleeting taste of joy. Ahmose leaned against a cool stone pillar, his back still aching from hauling granite blocks earlier that day. He watched as young women, adorned with garlands of flowers, swayed and laughed, their movements fluid and graceful. Children chased each other through the throng, their shouts of delight momentarily eclipsing the persistent throb in his lower back. Even the guards, usually stern and unyielding, seemed to soften in the festive atmosphere. He allowed himself a small smile, a brief respite from the gnawing worries that usually occupied his thoughts. He closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, feeling the vibrations in his bones. For a moment, he could almost forget the gnawing hunger, the endless toil, the whispers of rebellion that now echoed in his heart. A hand clapped him gently on the shoulder. Ahmose opened his eyes to find Horemheb standing beside him, his weathered face etched with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Enjoying the revelry, Ahmose?" Horemheb's voice was low, barely audible above the din. Ahmose nodded. "It is pleasant. A welcome change." Horemheb's smile faded slightly. "Pleasant, yes. But do not forget yourself, boy. These fleeting moments are illusions. Tomorrow, the blocks will still need hauling, and the Pharaoh will still demand his tribute." He paused, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Remember what I told you. Tread carefully." Ahmose sighed, the brief lightness of the festival instantly evaporating. "I know, Horemheb. I haven't forgotten." Horemheb's gaze softened. "I worry about you, Ahmose. You have a good heart, too good perhaps for these times." He gestured towards the brightly lit courtyards, the overflowing tables laden with food and drink. "Look at them, Ahmose, reveling in their good fortune, oblivious to the suffering just beyond these walls. They feast while others starve. They celebrate while others mourn." He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Let me tell you a story from my youth, Ahmose. Before these gray hairs and aching joints, I was young, like you, full of fire and righteous anger. I saw the injustices, the inequalities, and I spoke out. I gathered others, like you, who felt the same. We believed we could change things." Horemheb paused, his eyes clouding with a distant pain. "We were wrong. The Pharaoh's hand is long, and his reach is swift. Many of those I stood with disappeared. Some are never seen again. Others returned, broken and silent, their spirits crushed." He straightened his back, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. "I survived, almost, but I learned a valuable lesson. Discretion is the better part of valor. Choose your battles wisely and know when to keep your silence. The Pharaoh's ears are everywhere, even in the midst of celebration." He clapped Ahmose on the shoulder again, this time with a heavier hand. "Enjoy the festival, Ahmose. Find some small joy in these fleeting moments, but do not let it blind you to the truth." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the throng of revelers, leaving Ahmose alone with his thoughts. The music still pulsed, the dancers still twirled, but the joy had vanished. Horemheb's words hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of this fleeting happiness. Ahmose looked out at the brightly lit courtyards, at the laughing faces, and saw not celebration, but a fragile facade, masking the harsh realities of their lives. The aroma of roasting meats now felt cloying, the sweet perfume of dates and figs sickeningly rich. He turned away from the revelry, seeking the shadows once more. The weight of his knowledge, the burden of his discontent, settled heavily upon him. He knew that Horemheb spoke the truth. The Pharaoh's power was absolute, his reach far and wide. But even as he acknowledged the danger, a small spark of defiance flickered within him. He could not simply stand by and watch the suffering continue. He had seen too much, felt too much. The whispers of rebellion had taken root, and no amount of fleeting joy could extinguish them now. He just needed to be smart, cautious, and find others he could trust. The weaver, Nefertari, came to mind, with her healing hands and unwavering gaze. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope. Whispers of rebellion. The aroma of roasting goose, a luxury even near the sprawling kitchens, teased Ahmose's senses. He tarried by the entrance, feigning meticulousness with a pile of limestone blocks, while his focus sharpened on the murmur seeping from within. More than the culinary delight, it was the simmering discontent that had become a persistent undercurrent in the palace's lower reaches that held him captive. "Cannot endure this way," a voice, raspy and weathered, grumbled. Ahmose recognized Kasai, perpetually dusted with flour from his work as a cook's assistant. "The Pharaoh indulges while our families go hungry. He raises monuments to his ego built upon our broken backs. A gentler voice, yet edged with resolve, countered, "Words are fleeting, Kasai. The walls are vigilant, even here. Raise your voice too high, and the vultures will find more than refuse to pick at." Almost breath-hitched. This was it, the escalating whispers solidifying into something tangible, something perilous. Sedition. The word resonated, both frightening and alluring. "But what recourse do we have, Ramses?" Kasai's tone was steeped in desperation. "My daughter." Her lungs rasp with every breath. The physician cites the ever-present dust, the pervasive damp. He insists she needs cleaner air. Ramses sighed, a sound heavy with weariness. "We are specks of sand against the encroaching desert, Kasai. The Pharaoh is divine, his dominion absolute. To challenge him is to court oblivion." Almost conceded Ramses' point. He'd witnessed the swift, merciless consequences for even the smallest transgressions. A misplaced brick, a spilled goblet of wine, a disrespectful glance. Each could lead to a brutal flogging, crippling injury, or worse. He straightened, the weight of the stone mirroring the burden in his heart. He had to tread carefully, not just for himself, but for Senmut. Senmut, whose nights were punctuated by racking coughs, whose slight body grew more gaunt each day. Senmut, who deserved a life free from endless drudgery and fear. Later, Ahmose located Senmut near their cramped vegetable patch, coaxed into existence behind the servants' lodgings. The setting sun stretched jagged, skeletal shadows from the looming pyramid, a constant, oppressive reminder of their enslavement. Senmut meticulously tended a struggling row of lettuce, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air was stagnant, thick with the combined odors of dust and exertion. The overseer demanded more bricks today. Ahmose began, settling down beside him. He threatened to cut our rations. Senmut remained focused on his task. He always does. He plucked a browning leaf from the lettuce, his fingers stained with soil. I overheard the women chattering. The Pharaoh's priests are apparently demanding increased tributes. More grain, more animals, a cold dread coiled in Ahmose's gut. Where will it stop, Senmut? Senmut finally looked up, his eyes, usually sparkling with youthful energy, clouded with apprehension. "I don't know, Ahmose, but I heard talk of escape, vanishing into the wilderness, seeking sanctuary in the south." Ahmose gaped, speechless. "Escape? That's insanity. They be captured, punished, executed." "Perhaps," Senmut murmured, "but perhaps it's preferable to this slow decay." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I saw a car driver beaten today. He dropped a load of precious stone. They shattered his hand. He wept like a child, Ahmose. Like a child." Ahmose reached for Senmut's hand, his hardened fingers finding his. He understood the raw desperation lacing Senmut's words, the yearning for something more than their current wretchedness. But he also knew the terrifying risks. The Pharaoh's far-reaching authority, the informers lurking in every corner. "We must be vigilant, Senmut," he cautioned, his voice hushed and intense. "I overheard talk today, dangerous talk. Revolt, but it's a path to destruction. They'll stamp us out like vermin." Senmut snatched his hand away, his eyes blazing with defiance. "And what, Ahmose? Are we simply to endure this? To watch our lives drain away as the Pharaoh luxuriates in his power? Is that all we amount to? Vermin?" Ahmose offered no immediate reply. He studied Senmut, his fragile frame, the passionate spark in his gaze. He realized he couldn't shelter him from everything, couldn't insulate him from the injustice, the pain, the hopelessness. The sun vanished, casting the servants' quarters into gloom. The far-off noises of the city, the rhythmic chanting of priests, the thunder of chariots, the calls of vendors, seemed to amplify their misery. Ahmose rose, his heart leaden. He knew he couldn't passively watch Senmut flirt with a suicidal act. But he also knew that to engage, to truly rebel, was to wager everything. He needed to find an alternative, a safer route, to combat the darkness poised to engulf them. He just hadn't discovered it yet. The forgotten. Ahmose surveyed the weary procession, leaving the quarry as dusk painted the sky, their faces canvases etched with the day's labor under sun and stone. These were the unsung artisans of eternity, their vitality ebbing with each block laid for the Pharaoh's grand vision. He spotted Nefertari. Her dark eyes possessed an unsettling wisdom, a gaze that seemed to penetrate the shimmering illusion of their existence. When their eyes met, a silent accord passed between them, a shared burden of the empire's price. He wondered if she, too, sensed the disquiet simmering beneath the gilded surface of the palace. A pang echoed in his memory of Senmut's ragged cough, a bleak counterpoint to the optimism he tried to cling to. The carving dust had claimed purchase in his lungs, slowly strangling his breath. And then there was Tia, forever clutching his tunic, her innocent eyes shimmering in the torchlight, so easily bruised. He would shield them, even if it meant burying his own rebelliousness. The palace, a beacon of polished white stone, stood in stark contrast to the stooped figures making their way home. It loomed as a symbol of divine right and earthly dominance. Yet, Ahmose knew the truth. Each perfectly aligned stone, each towering pillar, was cemented with the sweat and suffering of countless souls whose stories would never grace the royal ears. He found Horemheb cloaked in shadows near the barracks, his countenance a tapestry woven with past hardships. Though age had dimmed the old man's sight, a spark of defiance still flickered, quickly extinguished. "You seem burdened, Ahmose," Horemheb croaked, his voice a low rasp. After a moment of hesitation, Ahmose settled beside him, feeling the sharp bite of the rock through his worn hands. "I hear murmurs, Horemheb. Talk of revolt." A sigh escaped Horemheb, thick with resignation. "Murmurs are treacherous things, boy. They can usher in a silence you can't escape." His gaze drifted towards the distant palace. "I once placed my faith in whispers. I paid dearly. But Senmut and Tia, their lives." Ahmose's voice faltered, the words thick with despair. "I understand," Horemheb replied softly, his gnarled hand finding Ahmose's shoulder. "But impulsive acts will only deepen the darkness. Be cautious, be observant, and above all, safeguard those you cherish." Ahmose nodded, his heart heavy. Horemheb's words were etched in the scars he carried, a living monument to a failed rebellion against the Pharaoh's unyielding power. Ahmose also detected a tremor of concern in the old man's gaze, a paternal warmth that belied his rough exterior. That night, the palace throbbed with a hidden energy. The air hung heavy with incense and the hushed footsteps of servants flitting through the corridors. Ahmose traversed the familiar halls, the sleek stone cool beneath his feet. He saw the elaborate murals boasting of the pharaoh's victories, the endless feasts and lavish processions, a realm of splendor erected upon the backs of the downtrodden. He paused before an immense carving depicting the pharaoh receiving tribute from vanquished lands. The detail was astounding, the craftsmanship superb. Yet, Ahmose's focus landed elsewhere, on the ghosted reflections of the laborers whose lives have been surrendered, chip by chip, to bring the vision to life. He imagined their silent sacrifices, their hopes entombed beneath the relentless weight of obligation. Later, as he lay beside Senmut in their cramped quarters, the ragged rhythm of his labored breath filled the void. The dancing lamplight painted elongated shadows on the walls, accentuating the deep lines of depletion carved on Senmut's face. "I'm thinking of fleeing," Senmut breathed, his voice a threadbare whisper. "Escaping, finding some tranquility." Almost heart constricted, Senmut was teetering on the precipice, driven by sickness and desperation. But flight was a perilous gamble. They would be hunted, branded as insurgents. "We will find a way, Senmut," Ahmose insisted, his words laced with a confidence he did not own. "I swear it." He drew Senmut closer, holding him fast, attempting to shield him from the brutal realities that pressed in. He knew he could promise nothing beyond a shared fate, a fragile hope that they might somehow endure. As sleep descended, Ahmose dreamt of vast fields of ripening grain, of boundless skies washed in blue and pure air. He dreamt of a world where the forgotten were honored, where the suffering of the many was not the currency of the few glory. He dreamt of liberty, a distant siren's song whispered on the breeze. But even in the solace of his dreams, the weight of the palace bore down, a constant reminder of the veiled costs of power, the unseen sacrifices that buttressed the pharaoh's reign. The sun ascended, bathing the palace walls in a liquid gold, signaling another day for the faceless workers behind them.